brain, then we have, with the brain, we have our spinal cord, the inferiormost aspect of the brain is called the medulla oblongata. It is continuous with the spinal cord, and as the vertebrae, as the 26 vertebrae articulate, each vertebrae has what's called a vertebral foramen. As those vertebrae articulate, they form the spinal cavity, and the spinal cavity, or the vertebral canal, will house that of our what? Spinal cord. So we have the dorsal body cavity will house the central nervous system. As we take a look at the larger of the two, we have the ventral body cavity. And as we look at the ventral body cavity, it's going to be divided into a superior cavity and an inferior cavity by way of the diaphragm. So we have the diaphragm. So you take a look at your ventral body cavity. You have the diaphragm, which is a large dome-shaped muscle. What does the diaphragm involve in? The mechanics of what? Breathing, pushing air in and breathe air out. So the ventral body cavity is divided by the diaphragm, a large skeletal muscle involved in the mechanics of respiration, and the diaphragm will divide the ventral body cavity into the thoracic body cavity, and then that of the what? Abdominal pelvic cavity. So we have the ventral body cavity. As we take a look, the ventral body cavity will be divided into two cavities. Superior to the diaphragm will be the thoracic body cavity. Inferior to the diaphragm will be that of the what? Abdominal pelvic cavity. Are we okay with that? As you take a look at the superior body cavity, the thoracic body cavity is enclosed by the ribs and our costal muscles, this hemisphere muscle, so it's enclosed by the ribs and the costal muscles. The thoracic body cavity will be divided or partitioned by what's called the mediastinum. So we have the mediastinum will be a membranous structure which will partition or divide the thoracic body cavity into the right and left what? Pleural cavity. So here we go. We're taking a look at the anatomy of the ventral body cavity. We divide this large cavity by the diaphragm into the thoracic, which is superior to the diaphragm, the abdominal pelvic, which is inferior to the diaphragm. When we take a look exclusively at the superior cavity of the ventral body cavity, being the thoracic body cavity, we have what's called the mediastinum. We have the mediastinum. As you take a look at the overhead, the mediastinum is a membranous structure which will partition the thoracic body cavity into the right and left pleural cavity. So we'll partition, which simply means dividing the thoracic body cavity, TBC, into the right and left pleural cavities, and the right and left pleural cavities will house what organs? We say pleural, we're talking about the lungs. So if you take a look, the thoracic body cavity, which is enclosed by the ribs, enclosed by the ribs and the costal muscles, this thoracic cavity will be divided into the right and left pleural cavities by that of our mediastinum. So we partition the thoracic cavity into the right pleural cavity, which will house the right lung, and the left pleural cavity, which will have the left was partitioned by the membrane structure called the mediastinum. Can we visualize this in our mind's eye? Can we see what we're talking about here? So we divide the thoracic cavity into the right and left pleural cavity so we can house, protect, and support the lungs. Within the mediastinum, we will have the esophagus. So we have the esophagus associated with the mediastinum, the trachea, the thymus gland, and at the inferiormost aspect of the mediastinum, we'll have the pericardial cavity. The pericardial cavity will rest on the superior aspect of the diaphragm. And what's housed in the pericardial cavity? The heart. So at the inferiormost aspect of the mediastinum, we have the pericardial cavity, which will house and protect the heart. So as we take a look, ventral body cavity, we divide it superiorly and inferiorly by the mediastinum, by the what? By the diaphragm. Superior to the diaphragm, we have the abdominal pelvic. We have the what? Superior to the diaphragm, we have the thoracic body cavity. Is everybody okay with that? We divide the thoracic body cavity into the right and left pleural cavities by the diaphragm, by the what? Mediastinum. So there's a membrane structure that divides it into the right and left pleural cavities. Then we take a look, we have within this membrane partition, superiorly we'll have portions of the esophagus, the trachea, and then we have the thymus gland, which will begin to degenerate, and then we have the pericardial cavity, which will house the heart. Inferior to the diaphragm, we have the abdominal pelvic cavity, which is divided into the abdominal cavity and then the pelvic cavity. There is no structure that delineates the two, but we do have a slight constriction as we go from the abdominal cavity to the pelvic region. There's a slight constriction, but there is no structure like the diaphragm partitioning superiorly abdominal, inferiorly pelvic. Are we okay with that? So there's no structure that can delineate the two. We have the abdominal cavity. So we have the abdominal cavity. The superior of the two, it will house our digestive organs such as the stomach, large and small intestines, spleen, pancreas, that of our liver, kidneys, gallbladder, these would be organs associated with the abdominal body cavity. Then we have the pelvic cavity, inferior to the abdominal cavity, and the pelvic cavity will house portions of the large intestine, urinary bladder, and portions of the male and female reproductive organs. So it has the portion, the C's for portions of the large intestines, and our urinary bladder, and portions of the male and female reproductive organs. So as we take a look at the structural organization of the body cavity, we identify these as being confined space internal to the body. We have these confined space of that.
So media doesn't house the right and left pleural. It only houses the pericardium.
Right, they flank. The right and left, yes, the right and left, they flank the spine.
Okay.
Are we okay with that? So as we take a look, we have the body cavity, two major body cavities. Will be the dorsal body cavity, protecting the central nervous system, divided into the cranial and the spinal cavity. These two cavities are continuous with each other by way of what's called the foramen magnum and the medulla oblongata being continuous with that of the spinal cord. The spinal cavity is a long tubular-like cavity with a loud passage of the spinal cord through the vertebral foramen. We have the ventral body cavity divided into the superior and inferior body cavities by way of the diaphragm. Superior to the diaphragm will be the thoracic body cavity, enclosed by our ribs and our costal muscles. Inferior will be the abdominal pelvic body cavity. We said the thoracic body partitioned into the right and left pleural cavities by way of the what? Mediastinum. Are you okay with that? If you're asked what organs are associated with the mediastinum, we can say the pericardial cavity, the heart, esophagus, trachea. We house our right and left pleural, our right and left lungs. Inferior to the diaphragm, we have the abdominal body cavity. We listed the organs associated, or the viscera associated with it. And then we have the pelvic cavity, housing the urinary bladder, portions of reproductive organs, and the large intestine. Are we okay with that? So make sure in today's reading, take a look at the structural organization of the body cavities. They highlighted both in the handout you received today, as well as in our latter part of chapter 1 in the textbook. Now when we take a look at the ventral body cavities, we want to identify some associated membranes. So we have the associated membrane of the ventral cavities. And we have what is called the serous membrane or the serosa. So associated with the ventral body cavity, serous membrane or serosa. So alternatively, we can call this serosa for the serous membrane. These are membranous structures associated with the ventral body cavity. When we think about the dorsal body cavity, they are not associated with the serous membrane. They have layers of connective tissue, 3 layers of connective tissue we call the what? Meninges. We have the meninges associated with the dorsal body cavity, and the ventral body cavity, the associated membranes are the serous membranes, the serosa. These are double layered structures, membranous structures. They're double layered membranous structures. Histologically, the serous membranes are made of 2 types of our primary tissue. We have that of our what? Epithelial tissue. And if it has epithelial tissue, we know it's going to be associated with what? Connective tissue. We have connective tissue, so it consists histologically of epithelial tissue and connective tissue. And when we think about epithelial tissue, we said it what? Lines the what? Surfaces of the what? Body. We said that the other day. Lines the surface of the body. So we have the double-layered membranous structure, the serous membrane, associated with the ventral body cavity. Histologically, they consist of epithelial tissue and connective tissue. The two layers of the serous membranes, we have the parietal layer, and the parietal layer will line the walls of the body cavities. Are we okay with that? Serous membranes have two layers. The outer layer, or the parietal layer, will line the walls of the ventral body cavity. Are we okay with that? So they line the walls of the associated ventral body cavity. The parietal layer will then fold upon itself, and it will form what's called the what? Visceral layer. So one layer is called the parietal layer. It will line the walls of the ventral body cavity. Are we okay with that? Epithelial tissue line the surfaces of the body. The second layer is called the visceral layer. And the visceral layer will line the walls of the, line the surfaces of the what? Organs within that body cavity. So the visceral layer will line the surfaces of the organs, or alternative to the term organs, we use the term viscera. The visceral layer will line the outer surfaces of the organs housed within that particular body. Are you okay with that? As you take a look between the parietal layer and the visceral layer, the two layers of the serous membrane, is a small slit-like space that we call the serous cavity. So the serous cavity is a small slit-like space between the parietal and the visceral layers of the serous membrane. So between the parietal layer and the visceral layer, the parietal layer line the walls of the cavity, the visceral layer line the surface of the organ. We have a small slit-like space between these two layers, and we call it what? Serous cavity. And the serous cavity will be filled with a small layer or film of serous fluid. And this fluid, which is primarily water, helps to reduce the what? Friction as that organ moves within inside its what? Cavity. Are we okay with what we're saying here? So the serous cavity is filled with a film of serous fluid, which is primarily water, and the serous fluid will reduce the friction of the organ as it moves within its cavity. So let's take back up here. We said our ventral body cavities are associated with our serosa. Histologically, serosa are made of what type of tissue? Epithelial tissue and what? Connective tissue. These membrane structures have two layers. We have what's called the what? Parietal layer that's going to line the walls of the cavity. Then it's going to fold upon itself and give rise to what's called the what? Visceral layer, which is going to line the outer surfaces of the what? Organ. So if we can conceptualize, if my hand was a partially inflated balloon, my fist represents an organ. Or this is an organ. Let's say it's a heart, so to speak. Here's the balloon. The balloon is going to represent the serous membrane. If I push my fist, which is an organ, into the serous membrane, the portion of that serous membrane that comes in direct contact with the fist, which is an organ, is going to be which layer? The visceral layer. Are you okay with that? outer layer, which is not in direct contact with the surface of this organ, this will be the what? Parietal layer, which lines the walls of the cavity. Can everybody feel that or see that? So if we take a look at what I was trying to demonstrate, this is in our textbook. We're using the analogy of the fist representing an organ, a partially inflated balloon representing the serous membrane. And we push the fist through the partially inflated balloon. The portion of that balloon, which is the serous membrane, which comes in direct contact with the organ, will be that of the serous, the visceral layer. The portion that is in not direct contact but lines the walls of the cavity will be that of the what? Parietal layer, or parietal serosa. And we said there's a potential space between the visceral layer and the what? Parietal layer. This will be our serous cavity. And the serous cavity, we said, will be filled with a small film of our what? Serous fluids, which will reduce the friction as this organ moves within its cavity. Is everybody okay with that? So are we okay with visceral layer, parietal layer? Serous cavity, serous fluid. Thoracic cavity, abdominal cavity. Are we okay with that? So in your assignment today, you would mention the name of the visceral serous membranes. Be familiar with the names of the serous membranes. They're going to identify the names of the serous membranes associated with the respective body cavities. We have our pleurae. So we have both the parietal and the visceral pleurae. Make sure you can identify pleurae. We know it's going to be associated with the what? Pleural cavities. We have the pericardium. So we have the parietal and the visceral pericardium. We know pericardium will be the serous membrane associated with the what? Pericardial cavity and the heart. Are we okay with that? Then we have the peritoneum. The peritoneum, we have both the visceral and the parietal. And this will be the serous membrane associated with the abdominal pelvic cavity. Are we okay with that? So make sure you're familiar with the nomenclature of the serous membranes associated with the respective ventral body cavity. Are there any questions up to this point? Are we okay? In your reading today, in the handout, we're going to mention some additional terms that I want you to become familiar with. They're going to mention the mesenteries. And structurally, our mesenteries are double folds of the parietal peritoneum. So they're double folds of the serous membrane associated with the what? Abdominal body cavity. Are we okay with that? Structurally, the mesenteries are double folds of the parietal peritoneum. So this is the serous membrane that lines the walls of the abdominal body cavity. Are we okay with that? The parietal, we know it's not on the what? Visceral. So it's double folds of the parietal peritoneum. Structurally, or anatomically, I should say more correctly, the mesenteries will project the dorsal wall of the abdominal body cavity anteriorly towards the organ. If you take a look at this lateral view of the body, this is the dorsal wall of the abdominal pelvic cavity. We're saying that the mesenteries will project from the dorsal wall, this is dorsal, towards the anterior surface of the abdominal body cavity, and it will stabilize and support the abdominal organs. So the mesenteries are double folds of the parietal peritoneum. They project from the dorsal wall of the abdominal body cavity, and they project from the dorsal wall of the abdominal body cavity to the abdominal viscera. And we say abdominal viscera. Viscera is just an alternative name for what? We said earlier, we said viscera refers to what? Organs. So it projects from the dorsal wall to the organs within the abdominal body cavity. Are we okay with that? Can you guys see what we're saying? They're from the back to what? So they come from posterior to what? Anterior. So they project the abdominal viscera or the organs. The mesenteries will function to support and stabilize the organs. So they will function to support and stabilize the abdominal viscera or the abdominal organs. The mesenteries will also provide routes for the distribution of blood vessels to those organs, because those organs have to have what? A vascular supply to deliver their nutrients to them. Are you guys with me on that? Also, they will provide routes for the distribution of nerves to the organs, because our organs are innervated by nerve fibers to regulate their activity. So the mesenteries will also provide routes for the distribution of blood vessels and nerves to our organs. Also provide routes for the distribution of blood vessels and nerves to organs. So in addition to stabilizing the position of these organs in the abdominal body cavity, within the mesentery, which is made of epithelial tissue and what else type of tissue? Connective tissue, traveling within this parietal peritoneum that we're calling the mesentery, will transfer or will have blood vessels that are supplying blood to the organs so they can receive the nutrients that they need to carry out their function. Are you okay with that? Also, innervate them with nerves so we can regulate their activity. The mesenteries also are associated with the accumulation of adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is just a name for what? Fat tissue. So also will serve as a storage form of what? Energy, insulation, and to some degree cushion or protection of the organ. So the mesenteries structurally are what? Just double folds of our what? Parietal peritoneum. Structurally, they project from the back to the what? Front. From the dorsal wall of the abdominal body cavity to the viscera in the abdominal body cavity. They stabilize this metal.
What's the purpose of it being folded?
The serous membrane being exploded as it forms. So the parietal is folding as it forms. So that's protecting from the back to the front, the whole front itself. As we take a look, we said a stabilized position of the organ. Also, within this tissue will deliver blood vessels and nerves to the organ. Are we okay with that? Also, they have a disposition to accumulate droplets of fat. So it will also function in energy storage, insulation, and protection of the organ. So to get a look at what we're trying to say, if we take a look, we have the large intestines here, one of the organs in the abdominal body cavity, and as you take a look at this yellow sheet of tissue here, here. This is our large intestine. You see the yellow sheet of tissue here? This would represent the mesentery. The yellow represents the what? Deposition of what? Adipose, the fat tissue, as we see here. And if you look closely, you can see a what? Blood vessel suspended within this what? Mesentery. Also, we have nerve fibers associated with the intrinsic exterior nervous system innervating the smooth muscle cells of the organ. So this will be the tissue that helps to stabilize the position of the internal visceral and the abdominal body cavity. Also, importantly, it will provide routes to distribution of blood vessels and nerves. They also will mention some other terms I want you to look out for: greater and lesser omentum, make sure you can identify what are the greater and lesser omentum. I'll tell you today, the greater and lesser omentum are just named mesenteries. They're named mesenteries. Are we okay with that? So if we say, what is the function of the greater omentum? We just said that they're what? Named mesenteries. Just mesenteries is what they name. So if I ask you, what's the function of the greater omentum? What would you say? Support, stabilize the organs, provide routes for distribution of what? Blood vessels and nerves, accumulate fat that provides energy storage, insulation, and what? Protection. So these are just named mesenteries. The greater omentum you will see will come down the anterior surface of the abdominal body cavity. It has a strong ability to accumulate fat, and the greater omentum and the fat that accumulates in the greater omentum gives rise to that what? Pot belly. When somebody's overweight and they have a large pot belly, that's directly associated with the accumulation of fat in the greater omentum. Also, retroperitoneal. Make sure you know what the term retroperitoneal means. Make sure you know what retroperitoneal. We know retro, the prefix means what? Behind. Make sure you know what the retroperitoneal cavity is. And make sure you can identify some organs that are said to be retroperitoneal. What are some organs? This might require you to take a look in your textbook to find out what organs are said to be retroperitoneal or behind the peritoneal cavity. Are you okay with that? Is everybody clear what we're saying? Alright, so today you're going to work on an exercise entitled Body Cavity. And some housekeeping stuff we're going to do now. I know I talked a little bit more than I wanted to, but tomorrow